Hi guys, today I thought I would share Christmas cake with you, and this recipe is the recipe I've been using for over 30 years and it's never let me down. I've also put a photograph of the recipe right at the end for ease of use, so don't worry about that. It's going to be a different Christmas for most of us, and there's no denying that. So I thought perhaps I should look at Christmas cakes because they are a big tradition. But I know that many people have worries about making their own Christmas cake. There seems to be quite some myth around it. So hopefully you might see from this that it's not that difficult at all. And when you make your own, you know what goes into it. And making your own is sort of part of Christmas. It's traditional to start your Christmas around late September, October time of year because it needs time to mature. However, by the end of this video, I'm hoping that we might have come up with some ideas that are very practical for the current times we live in. Useful tip number 1, weigh out all your ingredients before you start. Then get a big bowl and add all of your dried fruits, nuts and glacé cherries. So useful tip number 2, glacé cherries are very sticky. And what happens is they will sink to the bottom of the cake mix. So if you add a little flour to them, before adding them to the mix, they'll stay dispersed in the cake as normal. After this, I'm adding my spices to the flour. I add them to that because that way when the flour gets sifted, the spices get distributed evenly throughout the flour and therefore throughout the cake. Put this bowl to one side, and taking a separate bowl, you want to cream together your butter, your sugar and your grated zest of lemon. You want to cream this really well. And useful tip number 3 is use the biggest bowls you've got because there's a lot of ingredients in a Christmas cake and a lot of mixing, so you need the space and capacity. Now it's time to add the eggs. So it's useful tip number 4. Crack your eggs individually into a little bowl and then tip them into a bigger bowl once you know that the egg is safe and fresh to use. That way you don't spoil all your eggs and all your cake. We're going to add this egg mixture in 2 parts, creaming as we go, and we're wanting to avoid curdling. Now if your mixture does start to curdle, no panic, it's not the end of the world. Just add a little bit of your flour and that'll stop the curdling. And when you've mixed this in gently with a metal spoon, you want to start adding your flour in 2 parts. Adding your flour in 2 parts gives you the opportunity to make sure that the first half is thoroughly mixed in and evenly distributed before adding the second half. And don't forget your pinch of salt. I tip it into my hand from a little tub because that way you don't end up with accidental spillages of great amount of salts that you don't want and can't remove from a mix. Next is adding the brandy. Now I've measured it out here to show you guys, but normally I just tip it in because in actual fact it doesn't matter to be precise about this. And in truth, years ago I used to soak my dried fruit overnight in the alcohol, but I find I prefer the alcohol just in the general mix rather than only soaked up into the fruit. The brandy at this stage is added for flavour because of course the alcohol will be burnt off in the baking process with heat. Remember that dried fruit mix that we put to one side? Well, here it comes. This is where you amalgamate both together. And here's the big mix, and as you can see it really does fill a bowl. It's worth at this stage taking that extra minute to mix this up thoroughly. This is where you'll get the balance achieved with your cake. Right, onto the tins. Normally I'd make a big 8-inch round Christmas cake as given in the recipe, but this year I thought, would it be useful to try and make a smaller one? So I have followed the rules of wrapping the tin in paper, greased with paper, and I have lined the bottom and stood it on paper. Lining the bottom, you can either use ready cut sizes of greaseproof paper that you can buy in packs, but it's better really if you can have a bigger piece that you cut yourself and then feather around the edge. This feathering forms up the side of the tin and prevents any leakage because it's a loose bottom tin and you never know. As you can see, I've just loosely put the interior lining paper of the tin into the tin, but I haven't glued it or stuck it or attached it in any way, because as you put the mixture in, you will see that that does that job for you. It just pushes it out evenly to the sides. And the benefit of this is when you come to take the cake out and you want to remove the paper, it just peels off. Ideally, you want to pack the tin to about 2/3 of its depth with your mixture, making sure that you've thoroughly pressed it out to all the sides and that it's sitting firm within the tin. And then I use the back of this large spoon to press a well into the centre of the cake. And you do this because a cake will rise more in the centre and you don't want it to be raised. You want quite a smooth, even flat surface on the top if you can get it. And this is what the well does. Then I tried something new. These are my new practical tips. I thought, I wonder if it's possible, if you're using a smaller amount of Christmas cake mix and a much smaller tin, if you could just cook it the way you would perhaps a sponge cake and not bother with all the lining papers and the feathering and the standing it on paper and covering it up after an hour and a half and all of that, which you do need for the bigger cake or it will be burnt and dried out. So I took this small case and I put the mixture in that and just thought I'll cook it like a normal cake. So I lined the bottom with a circle of greaseproof and cooked it without anything else extra added to it. I then took this mini silicone tub and loaded it with the remainder of the cake mix. And I baked this just as you would a normal little cake. I didn't add any paper supports or linings. So how did we do? How do they compare? Well, here's a proper traditionally made Christmas cake. And as you can see, it's best to stand it on something tall and then slide the tin over it to remove the cake. And there you go. Can you see how the feathering of the paper has made that so much easier to remove? And there we have it, a nice evenly cooked Christmas cake with a lovely slightly darker top, but that's sort of the colour you'd want really. Next it's the medium sized cake, and as you can see that's leaving the silicone tin with great ease. I didn't even have to peel off the paper. And again, a nice evenly cooked Christmas cake. And if you compare it to the underside of the one that's traditional, you will see it is darker, and that's because it didn't have all the paper around it. And here we come with a little baby cake. Feels like the story of Goldilocks does this. And once I've peeled it out of its silicone wrapper, you'll see that it came clean away, and it's a much lighter colour because it didn't need as long to cook, being that it was so small. However, if you go to any farm shops and things or fairs at Christmas time, you'll often see a cake this small size, and they can be anywhere from sort of $2.99 to $4.99 in my experience. I almost got all the ingredients for these 3 cakes for that amount, and this small one would make a great gift for somebody, very thoughtful, especially this year. You'll see that I'm using a cocktail stick to put little holes all over the surface of this small cake to show you. And all of my life, it's true that I've used this method, the same as everybody else, whereby you use a cocktail stick to put little holes in, then you try and drip down the length of the cocktail stick with a pipette or other methods people have to get some more brandy into the cake to mature it. And here's useful tip number 5. Turn the cake over and just rub the base with some brandy. It soaks in perfectly, and then just store the cake upside down. Once somebody had told me this and I tried it, it works a treat. So no more cocktail sticks and hours of fiddling about for me. Your cake should be stored, wrapped in some greaseproof paper, then some foil and placed in a tin so that it can be airtight and the cake doesn't dry out or get ruined that way. At the beginning of this video I mentioned that I would have some tips for the modern day. I believe that you could make only a half mixture from the recipe, just cut everything in half and still get that medium cake and the small one from that. And I also believe you would be able to make them even the night before and still get a lovely Christmas cake. Never forgetting that anything homemade will be fresher and tastier and all the lovelier than ones that you buy in a shop because you made it yourself. Your Christmas cakes need decorating and icing much nearer to Christmas, so hopefully at that time I'll be able to bring you a video out showing you how I do mine. It's really been fun sharing Christmas cakes with you today, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. So thanks for joining me, and I really look forward to seeing you on the next video.